I'm Todd Crawford,
I'm Eric Zavinsky.
and we are too cool for the comic shop. Today we're talking about Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy.
Absolutely. And we talked about the star of the Marvel Universe, Spider-Man, the last episode. And now we're going to do the same for DC, which I would argue is Batman. And, just going to lay this out there in the beginning of the episode. Christopher Nolan is my favorite director. You may say I'm pretty biased towards these movies.
That's okay. There's this interesting, I don't want to put anything too serious, so I use this word very loosely, but discrimination against fanboys. What I mean by that is if you're enthusiastic about something, or let's say if you like every album a band puts out, or every film a director puts out, you're considered biased or your opinion's devalued. But honestly, I envy people who feel that way about certain filmmakers. I mean, I like every Nolan movie I've seen. He's not my favorite filmmaker, but he's definitely an interesting one that I consistently enjoy and look forward to his projects.
Oh, yeah, that's fair enough. And I generally try to view it as a positive thing. Like, times when you could argue that I'm a fanboy for a lot of things, even though when something gets so big, there's bound to be stuff that you like less. Like Star Wars is a good example. Not everything in Star Wars is created equally, and not everything Batman related is created equally as well. When people really like a band or a director, sometimes I just think like they have an open mind, especially when that band or that director is like a lot of movies or a lot of albums, and they just the style. And like for me, Nolan just really expands my imagination a lot of the times. He's not necessarily like the best writer of drama or characters necessarily. um, I think in the Dark Knight trilogy he does a really good job, and by far the best job for Batman, his universe, that I think we've seen on the silver screen.
One of the interesting things that I find about the Dark Knight trilogy is so it was written by co-written, I should say, really, by David Goyer, and he's a fascinating example, kind of like a Joss Whedon type that I always mention. With Joss Whedon and his writing on Toy Story is superb, but generally when he's left his own devices, I don't enjoy his work, and I think David Goyer is very much the same. He later went on to work on Man of Steel. He did the Blade trilogy, the third of which, Blade Trinity, I think it was called, he directed. And typically, he's one of those writers that when he's reeled in, like how Christopher Nolan kind of uses his scripts here, it's really well done and in this capacity. But then you see him left his own devices, and typically he needs that support system.
Completely agree about David Goyer. I think what did we talk about in the BVS episode where he's like super involved in BVS, and that might have been like why I had some kinks here and there.
I don't know that we did, because there's so much to discuss in that movie. We are like even like the pre-production and the studio changes and the struggle for autonomy and the different screenwriters brought in, including Chris Terrio that came on board with Batfleck. There's a lot of little points on there, but if we didn't, it's something that we definitely could have.
Yeah, no, but it just goes back to my idea that he has a lot of interesting writing ideas to put superheroes into, but I don't think necessarily like he's really great at being like director or the flagship creator, I guess, because he's written a lot in the comic world too, I believe. But he's used very well, I think, in the Dark Knight trilogy and what he adds to it, especially in bringing in. I believe I'm correct in like bringing in the main influences, especially into the Dark Knight, and how it's partially like an adaptation of the Long Halloween, which is a pretty beloved Batman comic line.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me leading into Batman Begins, which I rewatched yesterday. I've only actually seen this movie, I think, three times at the most in full as of yesterday, which is kind of crazy to think about, but it's always on TV, so I've seen clips of it so much that I have little specific memories of it, and it's always in my mind, even though I haven't seen it that often. But I was really impressed, first of all, by how well it balances the origin story and the different villains, because you got the Falcone family, the Carmine family. you got the Scarecrow, you got Bruce Wayne, you got Ra's al Ghul, League of Shadows, and it never feels uneven once.
That's a good point because one of our recent episodes was Spider-Man, and we talked about how Spider-Man 3 in pretty much every way does not evenly handle New Goblin, Sandman, and Venom. But when you think about it, um, there's really the villainous forces, like you said. There's Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul, and basically the group of mobsters, and they're all interconnected. Though I mean, all of their stories like service each other. I mean, it's written in a way that makes sense. I mean, so you can have multiple villains in a 2 hour movie or 2.5 hour movie, and make it not feel bloated.
Exactly, and what's so interesting is that there's kind of a hierarchy there, where you know that the League of Shadows is, the ultimate puppet master there. So even though Scarecrow is a memorable villain, despite not being in the final confrontation that Batman has, you still understand it and it's still memorable, but it never feels disconnected or distracting from the plot. And honestly, that I could think of, I can't think of another comic book movie that balances this amount of characters as well, including in this trilogy.
Yeah, the trilogy definitely does a really good job at introducing a lot of characters. If you're going for the big profile comic book villains, six villains in the trilogy, and there's kind of like two per movie. I mean, Catwoman is not really a villain in The Dark Knight Rises, but people think of her as such, so it's kind of like they have those two iconic villains per movie, and that formula works out pretty well. The trilogy.
I definitely agree, and even though I do think Batman probably does it the most flawlessly, I think all three movies do a very well job at maintaining those dynamics personally. And one thing, speaking of comic book villains and Catwoman being the love interest, I was reading this yesterday, and I'm not well versed in the Batman comics. I've read a lot of the essentials, not even all of them, but was she in any of the comics, or was she an OC in the Nolanverse?
Rachel is in OC for the Dark Knight trilogy.
Okay, I thought so. Because the more I thought about it, not just the ones I've read, but I've never even heard her mentioned in comic book talk.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really wise idea to create Rachel as a character because he is really interwoven into origin and Batman Begins, but also her interplay in The Dark Knight is really good, and I'm a huge Maggie Gyllenhaal fan because that family is very talented. um, like the legacy of her death in Dark Knight Rises, um, well, that's woven together really well in terms of the romance and the tragedy aspect. And I think back to the Keaton movies and Batman Forever, and like all of the love interests in those movies kind of feel like afterthoughts, and they did a really good job of like having the love interest be three dimensional and also not be an after.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say is that I agree with what you're saying, but I also want to point out that you praise Maggie Gyllenhaal, and that makes me happy because I love Maggie Gyllenhaal. I think she's great, but I usually hear people say negative things about her, and I understand in this series, she was recast from. I hate saying this because I can't remember the actress' name. Tom Cruise's ex-wife, and
Yeah,
they're
the Holmes, is that correct?
yes, that's it. Thank you. And I actually think it's just two great different performances. I don't think one's necessarily
I
better
don't
than the
think Katie
other.
Holmes' performance is bad, but in my opinion, I think if you're going to have to recast somebody, like try to upgrade, like try to find someone even better. And I think they do that with Maggie in The Dark Knight.
I'm biased towards Maggie, especially because I saw Dark Knight twice in theaters. Then once it hit HBO, I believe it was on after, so I've seen that one a lot more. So I have my own personal bias there. But I'm with you on an emotional level, at least.
Got like a feistiness to her in The Dark Knight that really matches the other men around her, basically. And I think you kind of needed that in The Dark Knight since it's a more intense movie. And I know you made the comment too that the villains in the origin story, like villains that make sense. They're not the high profile villains. Like you're not blowing your load on Joker in the first movie, like 1989 Batman film. you're building up to something. And I think when I was a kid, I actually didn't really like Batman Begins. 2005, so I was 9 years old, I believe, and it was just mature. It was like too mature for a 9 year old. So I didn't really get into it. So it was not until I was like in my teenage years that I went back to Batman Begins and really started to appreciate it for what it was trying to do.
Yeah, I actually had a similar experience. I remember I think my mom rented the movie, which is weird because she's not really into superhero stuff, but she does kind of follow Batman every now and then. She likes Joker. She liked the new Joker movie that came out. She liked The Dark Knight. So I guess she's a very, very casual Batman viewer, and she got Begins when it came out because there's all the hype. She rented it. I remember seeing the scene with Bruce Wayne and the handgun. I just went out to get like a glass of whatever soda or something, and I happened to catch that scene on the TV, and that's all I remember from as a kid. I just didn't appeal to me back then.
Yeah, and then you watch it when you're older, like that scene. There's a couple scenes with him having a handgun, but like something like him actually wanting to like kill and shoot Joe Chill, the guy who murdered his parents, is like very like deeply relatable aspect of Bruce Wayne that doesn't always get explored, and until that point wasn't explored in like a realistically depressing way, I guess.
Yeah, and the movie does a very good. It handles that very well with, like you brought up Rachel before in her role in the series. I love that she has, and she kind of inspires Bruce in his pursuit of justice and real justice, not like a flawed criminal system or how he sees it being flawed at least and corrupt. As you see the inner workings of the city as well as the mob and how they're actually kind of one and the same in Batman Begins. And I also love how the Scarecrow himself and his position in the legal system is also a play on justice in this particular film.
Absolutely. No, the movie does a good job of tying the world building with the thematics. And I don't think a lot of superhero movies really do that very often. Sometimes you have really good deep themes, but sometimes you're really engrossed in the world. They don't always happen in the same movie. Like I feel like Logan is a good example where it has really profound storytelling, but the world around it is kind of minimalist because you're really focused on the characters. Still one of my favorite superhero films. I feel like that's an example where you're not really focusing on the world building because the world's kind of normal. It's a little shitty, but it's also kind of normal. But really paints a picture of like a Gotham City, especially in Batman Begins, where it's kind of fantasy esque. Like it's this giant like monorail train that like runs into like a center building. Like Knight kind of strips those elements away later on. It still works really well. With, they explain it. The as a kid, I thought the movie had too much exposition. But last few times I've watched it as an adult, I haven't really thought that way. I really think the movie's pretty well paced.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I've been meaning to and kind of forgot about it. But how do you feel about the way that Nolan just changes Gotham City kind of drastically, honestly? Like, the first film's very Burton-esque. It's very like gothic and Blade Runner-like, and then he really strips that back in the next two movies. Do you prefer the original vision, or what it grew to become, where eventually by the third movie it's basically just Pittsburgh?
That's very true. Uh, hey, we both have a soft spot for Pittsburgh, obviously, so that's
Yeah,
great. Um, I really do. I view it as a trilogy. I view each movie as like individual, so it's hard for me to say what I prefer because I think the slight Burton elements that remain in Batman Begins work for that movie to its benefit. I also think that The Dark Knight really couldn't have worked with those elements. The Dark Knight is basically it waffles between my first and second favorite movie of all time. I Dark Knight. I, I know a
here's
lot
an
of people are.
interesting
That's not
thing.
original to say. But I love The Dark Knight. Dark Knight Rises is probably the worst of the trilogy, just because objectively it's got some questionable choices in the movie. Um, and The Dark Knight Rises actually gets a little comic booky. Like they blow up a stadium and everybody's trapped on the island, and like so really, I would argue that all three movies have kind of a different feel. Um, Dark Knight is like the most grounded, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I choose to see more as a triptych than a trilogy, because they are such different movies, even just different takes on the characters, honestly. I mean, yes, it is an ongoing story with a beginning, middle, and end. I don't deny that, but they're so different in so many ways that I almost just see it as three different movies that are connected, but they're not
Yeah.
necessarily point A, point B, point C, other than Bruce's inner journey. And one thing I just realized thinking about it is think about the climax in Batman Begins and how that movie is essentially about shedding this former image of Batman. Like, I'm too young to speak on this too well, but from what I've heard from people who are older, is that Batman was a joke before this movie. He was seen as like a kiddie thing. The Joel Schumacher movies and all that really just tarnished the image. So this reinvented the character. So to have those Burton-esque architecture and landscapes, and then to end the film with the monorail being destroyed, do you think that was Nolan's way of telling the audience we're shedding the old skin of Batman before he reintroduces Gotham in The Dark Knight?
Um, might be, but my opinion, the climax of Batman Begins is the most Burton thing of the movie. Batman Begins gets a little cheesy near the end, in my opinion. Like the plot of the microwave emitter, like pushing like a poisonous gas, and Arkham Asylum it's breaking loose, and like I enjoy it for sure. But before all of that crazy stuff and the monorail confrontation, um, Batman Begins is pretty grounded, except for like some of the architecture and the design and just like that. So I don't know. It's Batman Begins does not stick the landing to me as hard and as good as the sequels. But that's up for debate. But so I don't think it was a screw you to the Burton fans, because I honestly think the end of the movie is kind of more in that territory.
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely don't mean that as like a insult to those movies. I guess I just meant like breaking free of the constraints of the popular conception of the character.
That's that's true. So it's kind of like a rebirth, and the tease of the Joker might also be seen as like a kind of rebirth. Like, oh, now we're going into like the main villain. Buckle your seats for 3 years from now, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, whereas Batman Begins is all about like um, reestablishing the character in your mind so that by the end of the film, this big, essentially edifice, metaphorically speaking, being destroyed is the director's subconscious way of telling the audience, okay, so now we've gotten the old idea of Batman out of your mind. Get ready for my vision.
Yeah. No, I think that's you know the fourth wall perspective. I think that's basically what's happening. So I can agree with that. But yeah, Batman Begins overall just pays a lot of loving nostalgia homage to the Tim Burton movies in couple subtle ways. And it also does that with comics and like mixing and matching pieces of the origin story from different other things while including some original characters and original plot twists. So that's what I love about the Dark Knight trilogy. That it very obviously takes inspiration from a lot of Batman's universe. It's also mixed in with original stuff. So I mean, it's really I really like to see superhero movies do, and some MCU movies do that too, where they take elements but they swap them around and everything. Because I mean, that's what I want from superhero movies a lot of times, because you don't want to see beat thing that you already know, but having that familiarity is really good too, because that gets people to want to go to see the movie too.
So, on a more serious note about Batman Begins, did you notice that they kind of pull an emo Parker with Bruce Wayne in this one?
And Batman Begins.
It's subtle, but it's there. So at the beginning of the movie, and I just realized because having not seen his movies in so long, I didn't really pick up on it. So at the beginning of the movie, when he's like depressed about his parents, he considers shooting. I forget the guy's name, the person who killed his parents. His hair's down.
Joe Chill.
He's got the side bangs when he's depressed. But then
Right,
at
he
the end of the
does.
movie, when he gets his act together, he's got the Playboy hair gelled back, the yuppie look.
Right, so it does the emo thing, but like actually emo instead of like making me laugh.
Yeah, it's tasteful. It's tasteful emo.
There's no montage of like him dancing with a handgun in the street, even though I kind of wish there's an outtake of it.
I'm sure it's in the deleted, the blooper reel. If you stay for the credits.
Exactly. That's an ending credit scene before.
So, do you have any other thoughts on Batman Begins before moving on?
I mean, Batman Begins is just a really well told origin story. I mean, I think of cinematic superhero origin stories. I think Man of Steel is up there. I think Raimi's Spider-Man 1 is up there. Other than those movies, I think Batman Begins is like um best or one of the best origin stories for a character in superhero movies, I think.
On the note of Man of Steel, actually, the beginning of the movie, and I'm just generally not a fan of this narrative device, I suppose. But with it being told a little bit out of sequence, it's kind of like Memento, which I believe Nolan was fresh off the heels of with Batman Begins. I think he does a really good job of that. Whereas I remember the whole movie being kind of out of sequence up until the third act. It's really only the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie. And then once you're up to speed, it's very clever how it's used because when you first see the movie and he's in some prison somewhere and Liam Neeson breaks him out, you know, you're you're kind of shocked because that's not how you expect a Batman movie to begin, which is very intentional. So it does that to grab your
Yeah,
attention to be like, this isn't, your son's Batman. This isn't Goofy with Arnold Schwarzenegger saying one-liners. So then you get that
exactly.
confusion, and then he catches you up and like, oh, this is how he got here. Okay, here's a story I know, and then it takes you on this journey. But I think it does it incredibly well, and I have to give credit for that.
No, I absolutely agree. It's not like Memento or The Prestige where they just go ham with like several timelines going on and stuff, which I also enjoy. But I don't think that would work well for Batman. So I think that's used very tastefully. And yeah, the out of sequencing in the beginning act of the movie, I think serves storytelling, and I think it serves show Bruce Wayne in two different parts of his life, or three actually, if you count the childhood flashback. So I think that's actually very good. And then it stops doing it like Batman stuff itself starts ramping up. So yeah, I like that too. I haven't really said many negative things about Batman Begins. Do you have like any criticisms that you'd want to point at it?
Not really. The one thing I can say, and this isn't a criticism, I'm not saying it's a bad thing about the movie, but it's going to sound negative, is that watching it was shocking to see how dated it felt, or it felt of its time. And like, it's still a very good movie. It's still very good for its time. But like, it was so weird to see it and think, oh yes, this is like, 2005. Whereas I remember when it came out and when Batman Begins came out, it was like, this is the next level shit. This is, you know, pushing mainstream Hollywood blockbuster superhero movies forward, and they did. But it's weird to see it now, a decade and a half removed, and be like, oh yes, those days.
Yeah, it's dated in kind of a cozy way for me because I mean even though Batman Begins is only 3 years younger, I mean not 3 years younger, Batman Begins is 3 years older than The Dark Knight. It feels like it's more 3 years older. But again, there's like a lot of different things going on tonally and aesthetically in both movies, so I think that's also why.
Definitely. So speaking of the Dark Knight, I gotta say that ending to the Batman Begins, that final scene is so fucking hype. It's such a perfect ending.
No, it absolutely gets you super excited. I mean, pretty much gets everybody excited because I remember being a kid and liking Batman Begins, but not loving it. But when the calling card shows up, you're like, oh shit, the next movie's gonna be legit.
And it was.
Yes. Yeah, so let's talk about one of my favorite movies of all time. It is my favorite superhero film, a favorite comic book related film, sure. Um, And yeah, I will not have a lot of negative things to say about The Dark Knight, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who's listening. Um, I'll let you dive into it first.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one for me. You know how I told my story about Spider-Man seeing the first one, and then the second one was what got me into comic book movies?
Yes.
This is kind of similar for me, where I really was never much into Batman. I preferred Superman as a kid. I think just 'cause I had some VHS tapes of Superman that I was more familiar with him. I never really just got on the bandwagon. So when this was being advertised, I went to see it because my parents were going to see it, and I remember being in the theater, and I liked mob movies, I liked heist movies, and the beginning with the Joker's henchman going out and this little vignette, this short film essentially, opening the film with his bank robbery, just floored me. And you're just in it the rest of the time. And I remember just loving the movie, going to see it again a week or two later, which was so cool to see me with my father's side of the family and my mother's side of the family and enjoy it with both of them as a kid of divorced parents. That's a really kind of special thing that I didn't have too often.
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo that sentiment with you and most other people. Thing about The Dark Knight that really was better than any other movie that I know of is that The Dark Knight, for me, always has me, like, on the edge of my seat. Like, even when people are just talking and there's, like, tension in people's conversations, like, I always feel like just one step away from something going horribly wrong. And many, many, many things go horribly wrong, so it makes but it's just there's a tension and an escalation the entire film. I don't feel like you ever get the chance to, like, breathe. It feels like I don't know. It feels like the Joker is just such an overwhelming, chaotic force, even though he's only, like, in the movie for, like, maybe 30 minutes of screen time, perhaps less, way less. Um, just you feel like you're hostage to, like, this terrorist situation for, like, what is it in the movie, like, a week or 2 weeks, and it's just no, my heart rate is always up more than usual when I watch The Dark Knight, and it's probably a film I've seen, like, 3 plus times.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the things I really have to praise this series for the first two movies only, unfortunately, is they do a great job of balancing Bruce Wayne's life with Batman. And I love how the ending of Batman Begins ends with a Bruce Wayne mansion party that is basically crashed by League of Shadows. And similarly in this, even in Bruce Wayne's life with Rachel, and the scene in which she is taken out by Joker, and the famous dropper, as you say, kind of scene. It really, even in the scenes where Bruce Wayne is just living his life as a rich millionaire, it's just so tense, and things do go wrong, even in those scenes where it's just two people talking, unexpectedly so.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I mean, there's so many moments and so many scenes that are that essence of dread. I think it does that really well throughout the entire movie. I mean, it's almost like I almost feel like I have the least to say about The Dark Knight because I'm so riveted by it, like, the entire time. There's so many characters that work so well off of each other. I mean, Ryan, my brother and I talk about the side characters, like, just Fox, like, characters that would never really get a character arc in, like, any other movie or even an animated series episode or a comic book. Like, even he gets, like, an arc about the morality of, what he has to do to help Batman, and, like, all of these characters get arcs and conclusions and so wrapped amazingly well. I mean, yes, there is a sequel, and, it wraps up things further. Dark Knight is so good, it stands on its own, like, could easily use your imagination for what happens after the credits roll too. It'd still be, like, completely satisfying to watch somehow, like, not necessarily left wanting more, even though you know you're going to get it.
That would be a really funny critic quote to put on the poster. Not necessarily leaves you wanting more, but you know you're going to get it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the Dark Knight Rises tagline.
but that's a great way to sum it up, especially in a series like this where it feels like even though there's only three of these movies. I mean, Batman movies are never ending. Like I'm gonna die before they do. I can guarantee that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at least we can say that the Dark Knight trilogy had the restraint to call it a trilogy, at least.
Yeah, and I guess what I mean, not knocking. Like I'm fine with that as long as the movies are good, of course. I look forward to every Batman movie that comes out, but what I'm
Hmm.
getting at is to see one that's so self-contained, like you said, where you know there's gonna be a trilogy capper. However, it could have just ended at the end of this film with Batman on the cycle.
Absolutely, and to go to the other end of it, Batman Begins is a good origin, but to enjoy The Dark Knight, you definitely don't need to see Batman Begins at all, really.
No, I really basically hadn't when I saw Dark Knight. I've seen scenes of it, but I hadn't seen the whole movie.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people may have watched The Dark Knight. I mean, that either didn't watch Batman Begins or hadn't remembered it because Dark Knight did way better at the box office. I mean, that much is obvious. So that definitely was the case for probably many people in the theaters.
I mean, it's I hate saying this, but there's almost so little to say about Heath Ledger as a Joker because it's all been said before. But I do think it would be a disservice not to discuss him as well as the introduction of Two-Face.
Absolutely. Um, Ledger's Joker is one of my favorite performances. One of my favorite examples of method acting. It's a scary, harrowing caution tale of method acting, perhaps, and all that comes with it. Um, my God, it is a legendary performance that even though we just got a good standalone Joker movie last year with another great performance, um, it still doesn't take anything away from the legacy of the 2008 one. I don't think anything ever will.
No, I definitely don't. And what I love about most of the Jokers, the only one I would argue that doesn't do this would probably be Jack Nicholson. They each bring their own flavor to the character. They're so different that I think there's a few of them at least, and that's even including Jack Nicholson, who you could say it's just a matter of personal taste, whether you like one or don't like one. I think just kind of it's like Neapolitan ice cream. Some people like chocolate, some people like vanilla.
Yeah, no, exactly. I feel that way about the Joker, perhaps more than any other fictional character. There's probably like 10 interpretations of the Joker, um, movies to the animated series to animated movies to comics are all super memorable and stick out in my head. And that's even not counting like the Jared Leto and the Cesar Romano that it's whatever. I don't care for them personally. I respect whatever they added to the zeitgeist of the Joker as a character. But the fact that we have so many amazing portrayals of the Joker in slightly different ways, but still keeping the essence of that character, just proves how malleable, recognizable, how much respect people have for that character in general.
I think the Joker almost is like a reverse Joseph Campbell in mythology, where it's like you have different masks on the same myth, so to speak. I think that there's this chaotic energy of the Joker that these actors just get so inspired and possessed by when they take the role, and usually it turns out well. Every now and then you get a Jared Leto that goes, it backfires, in my opinion.
Yeah,
But it's like there's just something behind it, some fiery energy that when people take up that mantle, they just really let it overtake them, and it usually goes very well. And I mean, every second
yeah,
Heath Ledger's on screen, I don't want to disparage Christian Bale, who's of course, a fantastic actor in his own right. I mean, Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman are great actors as well. Um, but whenever Heath Ledger's on screen in this movie, I mean, he's like basically the only thing you're looking. He's just commanding every second, and even when he's not on screen, he's basically what you're thinking about and waiting for him to show back up, despite the entire movie being very well rounded and each character being very interesting.
yeah. No, exactly. And the movie knows that too. The movie knows it is very much like a villain's movie, but not in the sense of like, I don't know, some Infinity War where he's almost the protagonist. Like Joker is very clearly the antagonist still. It's almost like it takes a group of protagonists to fight one antagonist because Bruce and Rachel, Harvey for half the movie, and Alfred and Lucius and like all of these people. And and how can I forget Commissioner Gordon, who is I think amazing in this movie too. Like all of those people are against the Joker. So I mean the very sense of immensity of how many people it will take to bring down the villain is something that's translated really well in this movie. Because you don't really get that in the other two movies in this trilogy, where I just feel like most part Bruce Wayne is like hitting the antagonist by himself, or he's excluded from the other characters, or imprisoned from the other characters. No, it's like a team effort in this movie, and I feel like that raises the stakes as well.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out, I'm glad that you mentioned it, was um, Gary Oldman as Commissioner Gordon is just amazing. And it's one of those things, and I think the same with Michael Caine, even though I really liked, oh God, from Cronenberg's Dead Ringers, Jeremy Irons' Scar in Lion King.
Yeah,
I really like his Alfred, even though it's very, very different than Michael Caine's. Um, I love that those are, as once again, two great iterations of the same character. But Gary Oldman, in particular, I think, as far as I'm concerned, that's one of my favorite performances from an actor. It's, he's a Johnny Depp type. He's a shapeshifter.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, and he like shapeshifts into some of his characters are just like the straight man who's going through a lot of crap. I remember Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. His character is kind of like that as well, and he's like a normal guy. He's like pushed to the brink by circumstances, and that's what Commissioner Gordon is. Harvey Dent and Bruce are like all over the top caricatures of like a lot of outside turmoil can do to a man, but Gordon is kind of like that balanced, um, realistic view a lot of turmoil can do to a good man. So it's like all almost like there's three foils. It's like Batman and Harvey are kind of foils, but Batman and Joker are foils in some ways. Like Gordon is like among them to like kind of balance out the storytelling. It's very complexly woven together.
It really is, and it's I think that's one of the things that's good. Makes it a great movie where it's a visceral thrill ride first and foremost, but there's so much beneath that surface that keeps us coming back to it. It's not just a roller coaster ride. It's a very complex tapestry of characters and themes and lines of dialogue that we take for granted that are so prevalent in pop culture for so long. I mean, it's hard to name many modern movies that just resonate with audiences and fans consistently and as deeply as this particular film did.
Yeah, I mean, audience and critical reception on this movie are both super high 90s. Like, you don't often get movies like that, like almost ever, and especially not pop culture nerdy blockbusters. That's for damn sure. I mean, The Dark Knight is just a weird. It's a lightning in a bottle kind of movie. It really is. And I don't think we've ever really had a movie like it. And even for Christopher Nolan's movies, he gets close with how thrilling some of his other movies are. Nothing quite reaches that level of The Dark Knight, even though like those thrillers.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like Christopher Nolan he has two kinds of movies. One's where it's like, and I don't mean this as in they're bad movies, but it's like they just don't quite come together immaculately. Like I would say Interstellar. I mean, I enjoyed Interstellar a lot. It's got crazy high highs, and the lows really aren't that low, but it's not quite immaculate. I would say the same for the next movie we're about to discuss, Dark Knight Rises. But every few movies he gets that memento, or he gets the Dark Knight, where just everything falls into place, and it's just like so precise and so clean, despite being so complicated.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Interstellar is actually my second favorite movie of his. But it is very different from The Dark Knight, and I like it for different reasons. Um, Yeah, no, The Dark Knight, I think, was just also a big collaboration behind the scenes. Multiple writers, and his brother and his wife are always working on his movies with him, and it feels like a lot of people had a lot of input that really refined this movie um, really tightly, perhaps more than some of his other scripts and films in general. You said that a really good point that how visceral the action is and all of that stuff is underwritten by like a real cerebral emotional struggle. And my perhaps my favorite example of that is the boat scene. Um, One of the things that I feel like is underrated, it's not because people don't appreciate it, but I just don't think people think about it. How good extras are in The Dark Knight, perhaps the best extras in any film, honestly. Maybe Shawshank Redemption is up there. Like, Dark Knight has a bunch of lived in, normal looking people, probably because they were cast as such, um, really doing shit. Like, there's that one scene where the guy tries to kill the news anchor and gets tackled by other people, and then the boat scene with the prisoners and the pedestrians fighting over who's going to blow who up and worrying about that. Like, that is some amazing tension that's crafted between a bunch of nameless characters. It's honestly incredible. I don't know many other scenes in any movie that paint nameless extras essentially as like sympathetic.
That's a really good point, and something I even took for granted, didn't really consider. There's just so much going on in this movie, and that's one thing when I go to the movies anymore, and which isn't very often, but if I see I have a casual interest in, usually these blockbusters like they're by the numbers. They're not really that memorable. There's a big set piece at the end in the third act. There might be a little action bit, that kind of stuff. But generally, they're pretty standard. But then you get a movie like this where there's so many set pieces, there's so many moral dilemmas, so many characters, so many, and people talk about how serious these movies are. I think that they confuse for like, well, I almost said Bergman, but he's another filmmaker that's actually very comedic that people don't take for that kind of overlook that conveniently. But there's a lot of humor in these movies. It's just not humor as in like Batman doesn't fart in his suit. He doesn't
Yeah,
barf or whatever. It's not Adam
I know
Sandler
that.
comedy. And it's fine. Like, you got Guardians of the Galaxy or something, which is more comedic, and that's fine too. But for a Batman film, that really wouldn't be appropriate unless you go Adam West. And I think this movie really has, it has a lot of funny scenes. It does have that relief of tension, even though there's always an undercurrent of it there. And there's just a lot of different conflicts going on, is really, I guess, the point that I'm getting at amongst different characters, even going back to like Lucius Fox versus Bruce Wayne with the surveillance.
I mean, that could have been like an exposition scene that gets thrown away, and it doesn't really mean much. But they keep pushing it forward, and they keep writing it. A few lines of dialogue here and there. That's really all you need because this movie is so about reality and what it means to aim for high morals in a society that arguably, according to the antagonist, degrades to chaos no matter what. Since you know so clearly what the movie's about, write a little side plot with Lucius Fox in like 10 lines of dialogue, and you immediately are on board with like the 12th or 13th main character in the movie and like an arc all of a sudden. It just works.
That's a good point, is that it's a very complex movie built around a simple conceit. It's just like,
No,
oh, sorry.
oh yeah, no, it absolutely is. And like I think that's just proves that storytelling can be complicated. Like the methods of getting there. I think a lot of the best movies and a lot of the best stories in general kind of built around fundamental, simple themes. It's just like expanded upon in, like exciting ways.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And one thing I want to address here, and this isn't quite the tempo for the podcast, but it's an interesting point I've heard raised that I haven't looked too far into. that I'm curious about is I've heard a lot of criticism of this film in retrospect, saying that this is very much a sympathetic film towards the Bush administration, and it is known to be the post 9/11 kind of take on superheroes. And I never put that thought into it watching the movie the first few times. I definitely see parallels. I don't know if I would say it totally is meant to parallel the Bush administration so much as it just shows that whether you think you're the good guy or the bad guy, how morally gray everyone can be. But I find that to be an interesting take that I'm not going to take a stance on because I haven't put too much meditation on it. I was curious what your thoughts
Yeah.
were.
I mean, I usually watch movies to sometimes escape, but also reflect on society. But I don't really reflect on society that deeply to like, oh, it means it's the Bush administration's response to terrorism and blah 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 blah. Like, certainly about terrorism in some ways, and it certainly has a lot of those elements that were obviously inspired by life events. I mean, there's no denying that part. Dark Knight and Iron Man both did that in the same year, just in different ways, actually. But in my opinion, they're reaching because like I would need like someone to like write out how and in how many ways it's paralleling something that specific because like I don't really think it is. Might might be in more ways than I'm realizing. Um, I feel like I don't know if it would be considered sympathetic either because there's certainly sympathy that you have for individual characters. I don't know if you really have sympathy for institutions in the Dark Knight, like institution of corrupt city, the mafia, um, or even the citizens sometimes. I mean, usually when the sympathy is employed in this movie, it's for individuals trying to live in the society. Well, I would probably disagree unless someone had a really good argument for that being the case.
Yeah, what got me thinking about that was when you brought up the surveillance thing earlier with Lucius and the Patriot Act with that stuff.
Very true.
And what I think is, I do think that like maybe it was mirrored off of those themes and created that as because it was on people's mind at the time for sure. I think that this used those themes as inspiration. I don't think, like you said, I don't think it's a one for one. I think it's just these are things that are currently going on in our world. How can Batman reflect that?
If people said it was sympathetic, like the surveillance thing specifically, and people know that the Patriot Act was collecting informations to use against the villains, if we want to call them that. And then same way in this movie, then it's also kind of balanced out by Bruce very obviously like disavowing the technology after they use it for its specific purpose. So you could actually kind of go both ways depending on which part of that arc you want to focus on because it has a beginning and a conclusion to the surveillance arc. So it's an interesting. I think it was just used as like inspiration for an idea for the story. So I don't really think it's taking a stance.
Same. I think it's more about more abstract concept about morality or justice than it
Yeah.
is any one person or one incident.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, I know we've talked about the Dark Knight quite a bit. I guess like the last thing I would add is like need to watch this movie at least once a year. Like I pretty much always have since it's come out. I have very vivid memories of actually seeing this movie for the first time at a drive-in. My family, just like sitting in the trunk of our vehicle, like watching this like pretty late at night. Even though again I was like 12 years old, I guess when this came out. Um, and it was the mature vibe and all of that. I was just riveted as hell, even as a young person. So now the Dark Knight, it's lightning in a bottle for critics and audiences, but also young people and more mature people. Like it's something else.
All right, and the next one is Dark Knight Rises, which came out quite a bit later, as I recall. And one thing that I always wonder about with this movie is how different it would be if Heath Ledger had not passed.
I know. Really, it's really up to interpretation because I don't think creators have ever like explicitly said like, oh, Joker would have been the antagonist of the final movie and all that. I kind of like the way that it set up, because if you have pure gold in the Dark Knight, it might have been pretty weird. Joker was in a second film, and Joker's legacy of corrupting Harvey Dent and all of that still like the second or main crisis in this movie. That's how important the Dark Knight's plot is. So I think it works out pretty well. But I'm a little curious as to how it worked out if he had not passed. But the way it does, I'm actually pretty satisfied with all, I guess.
That's true because I always figured Joker was supposed to be in it, but it's a more secondary villain, maybe in the way Harvey Dent was in Dark Knight. I always figured his role might be the same as like Scarecrow's was, roughly, where he's released from Arkham and he's there, and he's just kind of like a little threat there. But I don't know if you can do that with the Joker, and I don't know if you can do that with this
No.
particular one, and just push him to the side.
Well, actually, you could argue that Suicide Squad tried to do that, and he wasn't the main villain, but he was like a little dash of villain, and obviously it didn't work out in that example.
Exactly, yeah. So, regardless of that, we got the movie that we did, and for the most part, I actually enjoyed it a lot. I'm a huge defender of this one.
Yeah, no, there are definitely lots of elements of this movie that I like. Like, high points of The Dark Knight Rises, I feel like are even better than Batman Begins. And there's a couple scenes in particular that almost reach Dark Knight level. Like the opening sequence, it's a really exciting way to start the movie. I feel like that's like really good, hitting the ground running. Don't really understand what the villain is doing. Understand that you should be afraid.
Yeah, I always really like the opening of this movie, and unfortunately, it's funny because the memes they haven't ruined it for me. They've made it better in many ways, but it's hard for me to watch without laughing hysterically because I see, for you, and you're a big guy, and I'm crashing this plane with no survivors so often. A lot of loyalty for hired gun. I've seen that meme so often for so many years, I can't not associate it with humor. Same with the more recent
Yeah.
Joker movie. I mean, even the serious moments of that film, when I saw it in theaters, it was one thing. Then I rewatched it with my mother when it hit streaming services, and I was laughing even the scenes that weren't funny because of the internet just ruining it.
The internet ruins a lot of things.
But
But I totally get where you're coming from there. Even before I was like super versed in a lot of memes, like The Dark Knight Rises just has this kind of extra cheese that the first two movies don't have. And it's kind of hard to put my finger on it because like there's no one reason why that is. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think it's a combination of Bane's voice is sometimes frightening, yet sometimes he, because he's not completely audible, in my opinion, all the time. Then Catwoman is like another movie. Like he's like comic booky as like Michelle Pfeiffer, but like not as exciting. I don't know if I really like Anne Hathaway in this movie that much, to be honest. And then just the general stakes and scale trying to do themselves of what they did in The Dark Knight. If you get any more big than The Dark Knight's like explosions and stakes and all that stuff, you basically wade into not realistic anymore. You wade into comic book territory. I mean, like a man flies a nuclear bomb out of the city at the end of the movie and explodes apparently just far away enough so that everyone's fine. Like stuff like that. It's just a combination of things that make this movie feel kind of like a joke. Usually not, but it's just got some tonal problems, I think.
for sure, it's been summed up to me as basically it's like and I love these movies. I am not disparaging the franchise at all, but it has the logic of like one of the like cornier Rocky sequels, like Rocky 4 or something,
Yeah.
where like Bruce Wayne's back gets broken, so he needs to like exercise hard enough to fix his back.
I mean, that's pretty much part of the plot, so you're not wrong.
And I love that shit. I think it's so entertaining. I love those cheesy 80s action movies. And so this hits all the right notes in that way for me, while also managing to be a film I could take more seriously because of the more serious themes. But it is there's a tonal conflict between this serious movie that is trying to be and this goofy cheese fest that the other half of the movie is, and I like both, but that doesn't mean they coalesce.
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree with you on that front. Like, I don't necessarily dislike either tone. Sometimes I'm just like speaking to myself and I'm like, pick a goddamn tone already, please.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Batman Begins, like you brought up, it does have two different tones where it's more gritty kind of movie, where it's almost like Taxi Driver or something at the beginning or something.
Yeah,
And then the second half is like this Tim Burton comic book movie, where like Batman's flying over the city and his eyes are bright red and he's shape shifting because they put the hallucination chemicals into the water stream and
yeah.
shit like that. And this
In
movie has
Batman
the same
Begins,
thing.
it's very much like the first half is the Taxi Driver and the second half is the Tim Burton. Whereas in The Dark Knight Rises, goofy shit and the serious shit is constantly interchanging. So it's just a little jarring sometimes.
Exactly.
But what's your like favorite of The Dark Knight Rises?
Like my favorite just like scene or just part of the movie.
Like favorite character, favorite scene, just something that encapsulates like what you wanted this third last movie to be.
That's an interesting point. It's funny. I think this is something a lot of people wouldn't like. I really love when Pittsburgh's cut off from the rest of the world and it's under like terror or siege. I really enjoy that and how it becomes this like post-apocalyptic thing where they're all hostages and Batman has to break back in. Once again, some of the logic stuff isn't there where it's like he caused that fire with the bat symbol and it's like, so wait, why did he take all the time to set that up when there was like,
But yeah,
no time to
the
waste?
classic. That's a classic nitpick. Like,
It really
who would
is.
do that?
But that's also Batman's character, though. I mean, he is a rich playboy at the end of the day. I mean, if he didn't have
Yeah,
flair, what's the point?
maybe he's just so badass that actually just took like 2 minutes to do. That's fine.
He hired
Just
some
can't
kids to
comprehend
do
how
it.
fast it was. No,
But
I agree with you there. I think the martial law they enforce is a good progression actually of the terrorist actions of the Joker. Because Bane is a pretty clever villain himself. He basically uses Joker's fire, what he set in motion, to further aims of the Batman Begins villains. So it really does feel like a trilogy when you look at it that way. We're basically combining the motives of Batman Begins villains and the Dark Knight's villains to like this end all Gotham will be destroyed in the third movie by the combination of those two. Like, I really do enjoy that. Another thing I really enjoy is Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character because I feel like in a lot of ways, he is like the new Bruce Wayne type. Because I mean, for very obvious reasons that like he's in on the secret and trying to investigate things, and he's actually almost staged as the true protagonist in a lot of the movie. You think about it, I kind of enjoy that because it's kind of like dealing with legacy and the city will always have problems. And the movie's bold enough to end on like a cliffhanger. It doesn't need like a spin-off sequel.
yeah, I kind of wish we would have gotten one, but I feel like it wouldn't have been as good anyhow. We were in a different creative team, and it would have been more of a splinter anyhow. So it's probably good we did just get the clean cut. But I really like Joseph Gordon-Levitt, especially during that phase when his career was really taking off. So I was happy to see him in a role like this. I really liked his character for the most part. My only issue with that character, and it's so stupid, is a scene where he confronts Bruce Wayne, and I forget what he says exactly, but it's something like, he saw Bruce Wayne out when he was going to the orphanage at some point, and he had some look in his face, and he's like, "That's Batman," or he just knows by some weird
He
instincts.
basically says like that's what orphans look like.
That's what I thought. It was like some weird, like you had the orphan smile. It was like, what?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to rewatch that scene again. But yeah, sometimes I think it's pretty cheesy, but that's kind of what I guess that's kind of what The Dark Knight Rises is going for. You just kind of have to accept that because I don't feel like they did all these cheesy things like on accident. Like I think they just wanted like a big over the top alley. They do that. Um, they also like go hog wild with like making it a tale of two cities. Have you like read or thought about that very often?
Yeah, that was actually the next point I was going to bring. The Tale of Two Cities is probably one of the top five most influential books I've ever read in my life. The final
Too.
morality tale of that.
Glad
I
that you and I are both fans. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, actually, the current three books I'm writing basically rip off A Tale of Two Cities so bad with the two protagonists and how it
Nice.
does foil characters. I learned entirely from Dickens, I would say almost, and I later
I
explored
think
that
it
with
is one of the
like
best novels ever written, I would argue. But I'm a huge fan of it. Ever since I read it in like 10th grade for honors English, like I was in love.
the same. Everybody else in my class really didn't care for it, but they liked Dickens' other work, and I like Dickens' other work too. I'm not disparaging those, but for personal
Uh,
preference, I think A Tale of Two, the way it's written, particularly the prose, and also the morality of it, the way that it's a historical tale, how different it is for Dickens' usual work. I think it's one of actually the most beautiful stories and one of the most beautiful books ever written.
yeah, no, I agree. And I would argue that A Tale of Two Cities was kind of the Dark Knight of its time, basically. Like, it was an 1800s novel, so it was definitely after the French Revolution by a good chunk of time. But, it's talking about a tumultuous time in not too far away history. Like people are still alive who experienced it. And the same with terrorism in the Dark Knight. How the love triangle is like Bruce Harvey and Rachel. Like freaking Alfred is like quoting A Tale of Two Cities and Sidney Carton like for Bruce's fake funeral and all that shit at the end of the movie. Like I feel like the Nolan brothers really like A Tale of Two Cities as well, and that's pretty evident. It's kind of evident in The Dark Knight, but it's really evident in The Dark Knight Rises.
I agree. I think that's why when Dark Knight Rises, it was actually my favorite trilogy when it came out. I think mostly due to hype, probably, but still, like it was. I really connected with that Tale of Two Cities stuff because I was really into that book at the time. So seeing a Batman adaptation was so exciting for me. And I have to admit though, I am picturing right now like Charles Dickens turning like Bleak House, and his publisher's like, "That's a big book," and Charles Dickens is like, "For you."
Oh my god. Yeah, it's really cool, honestly, because like I can't think of many other examples where it's like, well, this blockbuster is like absolutely taking like very overt inspiration from classic literature. Like I was in high school at the time The Dark Knight Rises came out. I just remembered the hype for this movie, like you said. The hype for the movie was very much fittingly over like it was overflowing. Everyone loved The Dark Knight so much, so everybody was pretty much certain that The Dark Knight Rises will also be one of the greatest films ever made too. I mean, that's pretty much how people were acting, which is cool. I mean, I love hype cycles for movies, even if a movie doesn't turn out to be as good as you wanted it to be. Like, the hype for movies is fun to me. I just enjoy being excited. Um,
Exactly. I remember
then
some like, oh, sorry.
yeah, and then I was just gonna say B that combined with a lot of friends in high school at the time were like other students who really liked English and were in the honors classes. And once the movie came out, like the following school year, remember talking about with some friends, especially on the cross country team, we were just like, man, Tale of Two Cities references were like really strong and stuff. So it stuck with me.
That's funny. Yeah, I get why that's off-putting to some people. I guess my thoughts on this movie and generally on Batman movies is at this point in time, it's such a consistent thing. You can expect it. I mean, it's almost like you have death, taxes, and Batman movies. And so like when a new one comes out and it's weird or it's a different take on the character, or in like in this film where it's a different take on the themes of the character, what you'd expect, I don't mind because there's no loss really. It's just another take on something that's going to be around forever. And I like that. I like that it's a goofy movie. I like that it's a weird tale of two cities adaptation loosely. I like that it's this like 3 hour epic. It's definitely a sloppy film in many ways, especially from what we'd expect from Nolan, but I'm endeared to it. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than I like this movie. I know that's kind of shallow and superficial, but it's a pleasant movie for me. It's very watchable.
No, I agree because a movie can still be kind of sloppy and be very entertaining. And there's some very core elements of the trilogy that are still intact. Like, the characters are here, actors are still doing a good job, and you're familiar with the world, and everything. So I feel like since it relies on that backbone, you can kind of get away with being sloppy, even if it ends up being your least favorite of the trilogy. I constantly waffle back and forth. Like Dark Knight's obviously my favorite. Like the things that I like the most about Batman Begins versus The Dark Knight Rises, but there's couple things about The Dark Knight Rises that I like more about Batman Begins. Like those two are pretty close in my overall Nolan ranking. Well,
I definitely get that. And what's tough for me is like they're kind of incomparable. That's why I really just don't even judge them as a proper trilogy because like Batman Begins to me to compare that to Dark Knight Rises it would feel almost like comparing Batman Returns to The Dark Knight in terms of tone.
yeah, no, I get that, but at the same time, that makes it even more funny to me that some of the story arcs that started in Batman Begins were not present in The Dark Knight or actually finished in The Dark Knight Rises. So it is just kind of weird how that works out.
No, no, actually you're right because I think whereas the first and third are the furthest removed from each other visually, story-wise, honestly, Dark Knight, other than thematic implications, is the one in the story that's is kind of the sore what is it, the sore finger sticking out, as the saying goes.
Yeah, kind of.
And I think
Yeah, I mean, so go ahead.
you brought up very well how the themes of Dark Knight carry over from Batman Begins into Dark Knight Rises, which definitely makes it feel more in place that I hadn't considered before we started talking about this. But in terms of actual like plot, it definitely is kind of like I mean, let's be real. It's the Empire Strikes Back of Batman.
Absolutely. And I draw that comparison a lot, especially since my two favorite movies are Empire Strikes Back and The Dark Knight. And they're both the middle entries in their trilogies. And they stand above the prequel and the sequel surrounding them. And they're both the heroes through the shitter and like all the bad shit is happening to them. I guess I just have a thing for people overcoming most happy of obstacles.
And you're not the only one. I mean, I think there's a reason that those movies are typically the most popular. I think there's a reason that we tend to love the second film in most trilogies the most.
Mhm. Toy Story 2 as well. That's another
Yeah, the
one.
one I was thinking of, which is very similar in some ways, but particularly because of Gary Oldman, is the Planet of the Apes trilogy.
Exactly. No, that is also similar in structure. Like, I guess there's just a lot of freedom in when a movie doesn't have to begin anything, a movie doesn't have to end anything. You can just kind of let a story breathe. I think that's why sometimes the middle entries and things are really enjoyable. For a lot of people, the favorite Harry Potter is the third one, Prisoner of Azkaban. Um, Two Towers for Lord of the Rings for some people, and I think that's just because like people like to see the story breathe and see where it flows without necessarily having the obligation of starting the story or ending the story.
Yeah, because you're already acquainted with the characters and themes and the location, so you want to return to see them again. You want to see where it goes. And what I love, especially like coming from a writing perspective, when you're writing a sequel, it's so much fun to take characters that you already know, whether you have an audience or not, it's kind of irrelevant, and just to develop it and build upon it and put them in new situations, put them in new conflicts. And basically you're setting up kind of it's almost like Sims or something, where you put these characters in a situation that are already defined, and you say, okay, what would character X do if he's put in a room with a personality type of Y, and how might that grow? And because you already know both characters, it's kind of just more organic. It's this weird little ecosystem that you've created that is just growing, and there's more plantation growing, and it becomes a richer and denser environment. And there's
Yeah,
just something so fun about that.
it's like the hero and the villain are like flowers, and then they're like cross pollinating into something new that you didn't expect would grow. And like that's kind of like the interrogation scene in The Dark Knight. That's like the iconic scene of that movie. That's because like I'm sure you're familiar with, superhero movies do this really well when they're really good. Like you understand the main idea of the hero or the villain, but you haven't seen this adaptation. It's like getting a different breed of said flower, seeing how that works against this other version of this other thing. Seeing the creativity that coming from very minor constraints of like it's still the Batman, it's still the Joker. The Joker can't be the hero, Batman can't be the villain. Like, you can't throw everything away, but actually stick to that very basic structure. Just seeing the creativity that blossoms out of a very basic set of rules, I think is really cool.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's really what leans into that idea that comic book characters are the new mythological heroes. And yes, it's something that's been said for about a decade now. But
Hmm.
there's a lot of truth to it and how they relate to our pop culture. The only difference is we don't literally worship them, but honestly, and the atheistic path that we've taken culturally, I think that pop culture icons really are kind of that replacement for us ethically and in terms
Yeah,
of what we identify with. It's not are you, you know, do you follow Muhammad or do you follow David? Do you follow Christ? It's do you follow Batman or do you follow Spider Man?
yeah, no, and I think I want to get really deep into like the real religious implications. Like, I agree with you. Like, we don't literally deify these characters. They absolutely are a modern mythology, and you could say that about other pop culture phenomena that pretty much everybody knows, like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, or what have you, where that's how we understand archetypes and ethics and morals, and like all those big blockbuster things are basically about versus evil at the end of the day. Obviously, there are other stories out there that get told in other movies. That natural conflict of selfish and selfless is what all types of people go to the movies for. I mean, it's very evident, especially about the superhero genre, probably the most, especially in the past decade or two. Um, but I would argue, like, yeah, in a lot of ways, we do worship them, give them our money, we give them billions of dollars in the box office, dress up like them, um, discuss them in a podcast that's 2 hours long on the internet, might get 10 views. Like, obviously, this stuff is super meaningful to us because, like, movies and storytelling in general, how we kind of find these things anymore. It is almost like a post religious world, and I have thought about that stuff a lot. But the Dark Knight trilogy makes me think about that kind of thing a lot.
Do you
It's something.
would you say there's a parallel between like going to some church or whatever have you, some religious service, and paying an offering and contributing to a box office and sitting in the pews of the movie theater?
Absolutely. I mean, I've actually heard multiple people, friends, people on YouTube, like, hey, like, movie theater is my church. Like, I think sometimes they mean that more literally than they may actually mean. On the surface level, you think they might mean that because they go there once a week or they go there often. You think about it, I mean, you go if you're an active moviegoer. Sometimes you go there to learn. Sometimes you go there to be engrossed in a story. And really, how different is that from the Bible or the Quran, or any other religious text? Really, a very like brain centric way in how we take that information.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into like the theologics of it or anything, but it's a fascinating thing where on one hand it's actually I've been looking into a lot of kind of religious writings and stuff like that lately. I brought up Joseph Campbell earlier, and he's got some great thoughts on mythology blending Eastern, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and showing that they're all kind of the same in many ways. And another writer that does that very eloquently is C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia books. He talks about that, where he thinks that really everybody follows the same God, but they should have different reflections of it in a comparison. He makes it kind of greenhouses retracting light, and I think that's really beautiful stuff that I've been personally interested in. And I think that these modern retellings, if you look at it optimistically, are keeping those mythologies alive with new faces. Well, relatively new. I mean, all these characters have been around for the better part of 100 years, if not longer, at this point. But in the grand scheme of things, relatively new. Cynically looking at it, it's kind of scary because these are man-made idols, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, then you get into the whole theological debate of, our religious idols, man-made idols and stuff, and obviously that starts to get pretty cool or contentious or whatever.
Yeah, it's a
It's
question,
essentially,
not an answer.
yeah, essentially similar. And I think the positive way you can look at it, because you were talking about how multiple superheroes, do you follow Batman? Do you follow Spider-Man? A lot of people follow both. A lot of people follow all of these types of movies. And if the really good ones have really good things to say, it's almost like you're getting that quasi multi religious perspective. You're getting a full glimpse of the spectrum. But whereas most people don't probably search Christianity and Islam, Buddhism and Judaism and all of those things together to form like a worldview. They might for superheroes, for whatever that's worth. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of my favorite things about this particular program that we run is that we're able to discuss this right now. But last week we literally discussed a Sony-run Marvel property, and then we discussed the more recent DCEU and MCU movies, and we said a lot of positive and a lot of negative things about all of them. And I'm not going to say fair way is judging our own assessment, but in a way that I don't think we didn't have anything so far that's been 100% positive or 100% negative other than maybe a movie here and there.
Yeah, because I mean, it's just for whatever the movie is, whether you think it's a 10 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10, if it at least has some sort of like worth as a story, you get to talk about it. And when you get to talk about it, you get to reflect on what it means. And like you and I did not agree on like the quality of Toy Story 4, but we still had like a discussion about meant for the character of Woody, like how it progressed the story, whether you liked it or not. You know, most movies have that ability to like spark a conversation. Sometimes this conversation goes really deep.
Exactly. And in
Yeah.
like Toy Story 4, what makes that kind of a special video for me is that, whereas you enjoyed it and I didn't enjoy it, I think we agreed on more than we disagreed on it. It's just that we kind of had two different emotional reactions to it, which I don't think are valid or invalid. It's just like, we both say like, okay, this makes sense story wise, that makes sense, or I could see this perspective while coming from two different angles. And I don't think any of us was being imperialistic. It was just communicating two different ideas from two different perspectives and respecting that, which is a lot of fun.
Exactly. And that's why we're too cool for the comic shop, because sometimes these comic book nerds get caught up in their side and whatever like they believe in and aren't open minded. That's why we're too cool, Todd.
Exactly. That's why they're not invited.
Exactly.
So
But yeah, overall the Dark Knight trilogy, very different, unique movies, but I honestly appreciate that because I wouldn't want them to feel so connected that they all feel like the same movie too. So they all kind of like stand out for different, somewhat related reasons, and I'd like that a lot.
same. I like them warts and all, and there's really not even that many warts. Real quick though, I just want to bring up for the Dark Knight Rises. I know we got sidetracked for a bit there, but how do you feel about the love triangle in that movie? Because originally watching, I didn't even think about it much. It was just kind of there, and then I heard some complaints, and I get that. I actually think after Rachel, it is kind of strange. But after rewatching Batman Begins and thinking about it and the thematic implications of the different characters, I'm actually going back on and say I actually kind of like the romance shit in the third movie again.
I think it kind of has to be there, especially since your movie is incorporating Catwoman, Selena Kyle, and Talia al Ghul, whatever fake name she has. However, I don't love the execution. I think the romance is kind of one of the parts that fall flatter than others. Um, I usually like what's her name? She ends
Oh
up
yeah,
being the villain.
Marion Cotillard from Midnight in Paris, and she was a hot item for a while.
She was. She's in Inception and a couple other award-winning movies. I can't think of her name. I usually can. Whatever. I feel like she's kind
Marion
of a bad
Cotillard, is that her
actress in
name?
this movie, though. She's poorly directed.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not her fault. I mean, she's been great in other movies. Um,
Uh,
yeah, I kind of know what you mean actually. Like, I think she was a good choice for the role. I don't think I hate to say it, but you know, like a super group when a band like you get like Slash, and then you get Eddie Van Halen, and you get like Freddie Mercury, and they're on a band together, and then like
yeah.
you think it's gonna be awesome, and you hear the track, and you're like, oh, this kind of sucks. Like We Are the World. I think that's kind of how parts of this movie are. Even though, like I said, I
Yeah.
really like this movie. Like sometimes it's just the sum of its parts, and not everything works out, even though it's good in theory.
No, I pretty much agree with you. And I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I don't really like Anne Hathaway that much in this movie either. I feel like she's kind of a corny, one-dimensional. I'm bad, but no, maybe I'm not really bad. And like, I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
super love that. I actually prefer Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman by a lot. So that's one thing the Burton movies have over the Dark Knight trilogy, in my opinion.
I'd really have to rewatch Batman because I've never seen that one in full. I've read some very, very interesting analyses on the cinematography of that movie, though, that have got me curious. I'm
But
just
it's a
not a
bonkers one. It's a bonkers movie.
That's what I hear. I'm just not a Tim Burton guy, so I just like kind of stay away from it because even his best movies that I've seen, like I haven't seen Big Fish or Ed Wood. I hear those are masterpieces. I'll see them. I hope I like them. You know, I'm always open to give another shot. But even like Beetlejuice and stuff, like I watched that this past year on Halloween, and another one he was involved with to be open minded. I get why people like them. I respect that. I don't hate the movies, but I left the room after half an hour. It's just not for me. It's just not my kind of thing.
Yeah. I
But
kind of get that. I think you would actually maybe think Batman Returns is his this movie though, because it's just what they do with the Batman characters is just kind of bizarre, but in like a good way, at least for me. I actually like that movie the most of the four Burton Schumacher movies. Oh,
Maureen wanted to watch that yesterday. That's what she thought I was bringing over. I kind of catfished her with the Batman movies, um,
that's funny.
on accident, just because she got the names mixed up. But I would like to watch them because like I said, the cinematography and some of the stuff I've seen from it in that level is insane. It's really good stuff. The use of like lighting and shadow and all that, like really cool stuff. So I definitely need to watch those with an open mind. Um,
Yeah, well, perhaps we will in the future episode. I know we'll
exactly.
definitely have more Batman content in the future. So
I will
looking
say
forward to
though,
that.
for the record, I like I almost said Michelle Williams. I like what's Anne Hathaway's Catwoman. I get what you mean. It definitely is archetypal, where it's like the bad girl with a heart of gold. You know, she's just a working girl trying to make it. The kind of
Yeah,
attitude. I think that's kind of the Catwoman character. Generally, it's been
it
done in different
is, but
ways.
I've seen it done better in multiple other things, and that might be my bias there. Like I've seen it done better in the
Yeah,
animated movies, seen it done better in the Batman Arkham video games. So like it just kind of falls somewhat flat in The Dark Knight Rises.
I feel that for sure. I'm actually I don't know. I have this weird thing where I like Anne Hathaway. A lot of people don't, and I get that. But I don't know. I'm
I
always in
don't
her
dislike
corner.
Anne Hathaway. Like I think she's pretty good in a lot of the movies. Like I said, I love
Yeah.
Interstellar. I think she's really good in Interstellar. I
Same, even
think
though she
it also comes down to the way she's directed.
Anne Hathaway's great in Interstellar, and this is off topic, but it'll be really quick. She unfortunately she's given the worst line in the whole movie, and it's that typical sci-fi modern movie thing where it's like, you know, love transcends time or whatever. That typical thing where it's like science, but emotion contradicts it, and it's that
Yeah,
thing. And she's given that.
she kind of spells out the theme of the movie in the middle of the movie, which it's pretty overt and cheesy, but the rest of Interstellar is so good, I give it a pass.
Saying that's how I feel with that one, and that's how I feel about Dark Knight Rises.
That's fair. Well, hey, before Tenet comes out, Christopher Nolan's 10th movie, maybe we'll have to do a Christopher Nolan episode in general later on in the summer, because he's got, other than Tenet and the Dark Knight trilogy, other movies. So there's that.
Yeah, we might just have to. Uh, for now, though, if you're ready to wrap up,
I am. Oh, I am Eric Savinsky.
and I'm Todd Crawford.
We have been too cool for the comic shop. See you guys in the next one.